All right, welcome to Charlie's Desk. Um, this is a special episode for me because today I'm going to talk about the Hall Braille Writer, which was the first mechanical Braille writer invented. And it was invented in 1892, and it was kind of a big deal. But first I should say, what is on the desk? So to the left of the Hall Braille Writer is, starting from the bottom going to the top, there's a diagram with the alphabet in type and in Braille. There's a post-it note with a couple of terms I want to remember about typewriter language. And then there is a little note card with the Braille cell, right? Two columns next to each other that are 3 dots high, and it has the numbers for which dot is what. And then over to the right of the Hall Brailler, I have a H. Schober tactile ruler, a great classic Braille ruler out of cast aluminum with all of the increments are filed in. So even down to the, is it the 16th or the 8th? The 16th inch are filed in. And then there's Braille markings. And there's a little sliding thing so you can make a right angle. And at one end of the ruler, there's a little sort of needle-like thing. It's thicker than a needle, but you can kind of push it into the paper so it'll stay put. So I have that ruler, measurements. I have a Phillips flathead screwdriver. Right, that was the only tool that I really needed to fix the Hall Brailler. A little file that was actually helpful too. I have some WD-40. I have a piece of Braille paper, and I have a yardstick. But okay, so that's what's on the desk. But let's talk about the Hall Brailler, because it's just adorable. I mean, I'm rotating it so it's facing the camera. It looks like a tiny little piano and a typewriter had a baby, and that baby grew up to be this Brailler. So there's 6 keys, right? Like most Brailler, but these keys, they're really reminiscent of the black keys on a piano, right? Because those are the ebony keys. There's 6 of those for each of the Braille dots, and they're painted black and curved at the end, just like they would be on the piano. And even the front face of the Brailler, which is, let's see if I can do my Braille measuring. Yeah, it's like 10 inches wide. It looks like a little piano, like you could almost like shut the cover over the keys, except it's made out of cast iron. And you know, what would be the white keys on the piano is actually just solid steel. And there is a space key that's on a long sort of lever that comes out, and it broke off. I broke it almost immediately. And it says made by Cooper Engineering and Manufacturing Co., Chicago, Illinois. And I think that this was the second company to make it. I'm not exactly sure how old this one is. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But that's the front of it. And then you sort of go up to the top center of it, right? You have your hands on the 6 keys, and then you bring them to the center. And then at the midline, it's almost like this cast iron trunk that goes back over the paper carriage, and it hovers over the embossing head, right? The area where the little metal things come up when you press the key to make the dots, and it just kind of hovers over it, and that's what provides the resistance. That's what's on top. So you press the key, the little dowel-like things come up, and then the embossing head hangs over it, and that's the pressure to push against, right? If we look at it from the side, it almost reminds me, I don't know if anyone has seen like the little like cast iron models of stoves. It's kind of like that. But so this is sort of, there's a U shape to the side of it if you're looking, and then the carriage moves through that U or valley. And there's sort of a scroll of bent metal that receives the paper. And I looked it up, but you know, on a typewriter and on a Brailler, the knob that you turn is called the platen knob. And so this thing that, you know, rolls, that you roll the paper onto, I guess must be called the platen. So yeah, let's set the scene. Okay, it's 1890. Frank Haven Hall is now the superintendent of the Illinois School for the Blind, and he gets there, and you know, there's just not enough stuff. Braille had been in the States for a while. There was also competing tactile scripts. There was New York Point. There was Moon Type. We'll talk about Moon Type later. Moon Type is awesome. There was Boston Line Type. There were all these other ways of doing it. So how did Braille win? The answer is kind of like, in part, this machine. So it's 1890. Frank Haven Hall gets to the School for the Blind in Illinois, and it's like, oh man, some organization needs to happen. So he's talking to some people, and he's talking to this guy, Gustav Siebel, and he's like, I want a typewriter for Braille. And it's like a piano, right? It's like a 6-key piano. You know, one key for each dot. I want it to look like a little key piano, but be a typewriter. And Gustav Siebel must have said, okay, cool, because then he made it. And it was ready by 1892, and then he was showing it to people, and people flipped, because the only way to write Braille previously had been with a slate and stylus. And that, you know, goes all the way back to Charles Barbier and Charles Barbier and night writing. That was just how you made Braille, with a slate and stylus. So this was, you know, you could go from writing Braille super slow to like, I think at the World's Fair, Frank Haven Hall's daughter did like 100 words a minute on this bad boy. And it's actually in that book, The Devil in the White City. It's described that like Helen Keller found Frank Haven Hall and like, you know, was told that he was the inventor of the Braille writer, and gave him a big hug. So I guess I want to talk more about materials. So the cast iron is painted black. On the top face above the keyboard, there used to be written the Hall Braille Writer in what's called Japanning. It just kind of is like gold, golden looking. You can kind of see Braille still on this one. So because I think it's made by the Cooper Engineering and Manufacturing Company, I think this was made sometime after 1911. So that would make it over 100 years old. And I got this one on Poshmark. It was on Poshmark for some reason. And I ordered it, and it seemed to be working. Here's a view of the back and the bottom. And so each of the keys is connected to a lever. And when you press down that lever, it pushes up a little pin, right? So now we're looking at the back. Kind of looks like spider legs, you know? The levers connect, you push it down, it moves a hinge, which moves another thing, which pushes up the little thing that makes the Braille dot. So that's the embossing head. And so you have 7 levers underneath, which is kind of nice. Only 7, right? 1 for each dot in the cell, and then the space key. And so this was pretty much working when it got to me, but it wouldn't advance. Like I could Braille one cell, but I couldn't make it advance. And So I'm just gonna make a sound with it, and then it'll help me explain something. Oh, there's the bell too. It's got a really nice bell. Okay. So you hear that sound? That is this little like saw-like thing. That is the width of a Braille cell. Like the teeth in the saw are the width of one Braille cell. And when you press any key, it kind of pushes down on this clutch beneath all the levers that moves it forward. So I press down on the space key, and the way it moves it forward is the clutch pulls down on this lever, and there's kind of a trap door embedded in the lever. I don't even know, I'll just describe it. And each time you pull down the lever, the trap door is in the perfect place for the saw to like go one more through, just like this. So I push down the lever and the trap door opens up, goes through. And that's how you advance forward. And each key should operate the lever. Now, when I got it, that was not the case. I mean, it seemed in great shape. I broke the space key thing immediately because, you know, if you don't push exactly in the middle, and you create torque and just bend it right off. And so, but all I needed to sort of get in there and take the lever out that has the trap door in it and see what's going on was a screwdriver. So I was able to take that out. I did learn one thing, which is don't try and like force something that is 100 years old without putting some WD-40 on it first, because it'll work. So there was one thing I broke on the bottom that holds that lever together for the space key, and then I made like a tiny little piece of wood and a screw to replace it and hold it together. So, you know, you break some things, you fix some things. So I'm going to load a piece of paper into what is called the platen. And I'm just going to continue to talk about the history. Okay, so it's 1892. This Hall Braille Writer is out on the street. People are into it. You can read and write Braille. The inventor of New York Point, right, another tactile writing system, William Bell Waite, he's getting worried. He invented New York Point because he was like, Braille, it's not efficient. Like, you know, his example is like, you need 4 dots to make T, but only 2 dots to make K. So that's, you know, inefficient. And, you know, he had a point, but his demise was choosing something that wasn't quite as uniform. He said it saved space and time, but his cell was 4 dots long on the bottom row, and then a 2x2 grid above that. And the reason why, when Frank Haven Hall was looking around for like, oh, what should I make a typewriter for? And he was talking to Gustav Siebel, he was like, the first thing that Remington did was that they standardized the size of the type. So on the Remington typewriter, the I takes up as much space as the C, as the Y, as they all take up exactly the same space. And that's why they have this little sort of saw comb-like thing. It moves the embossing, or it moves the carriage past the embossing head one step at a time. And that's why Hall chose to use Braille for his machine. And it ended up being the reason why Braille was adopted in the end over New York Point. Up until this time, all the books produced for people who are blind for sharing and stuff at libraries were done in New York Point. And it was just a problem because like all the money was split up, and like kids who grew up in that time, they learned like Boston line type and Braille and New York Point and all these other tactile writing methods. And like if you had a friend in Boston, and you like a New York to Boston friendship would be tough because one person would have learned New York Point and the other person would have learned Braille. So you would need, like, they would both need typewriters. And William Bell Waite, he did invent a really cool typewriting-like thing called the kaleidograph. But you know, it wasn't as easy. He was doomed. He also apparently was kind of like a hard driving person. He was like, this must be the right way, and that you know, doesn't always work. So one of the things that this Brailler doesn't have that other Braillers have is a backspace key. There's sort of release on the saw-like structure I've described, so it doesn't have to go through the trapdoor, and you can just smoothly move the carriage. So, you know, this is what it sounds like. I've been told it's comforting. Sometimes I have to press the space bar in addition to the keys when I'm trying to Braille. I don't know. It's 110 years old, or 100. If it's a young one, it's 100. The cool thing about Frank Haven Hall is that he was like, I don't want to patent this. That's silly. So he was like, I'm gonna sell them for $10. No, I'm gonna make them for $10 and I'm gonna sell them for $11. And that's what he did. But unfortunately, this altruistic thing didn't really work out, because then later people just did patent Braillers. And that's why you don't really hear about the Hall Braille Writer anymore, even though it was the first and possibly cutest Brailler there is. Little baby piano typewriter. It's made of, you know, brass and cast iron and steel and aluminum. You know, a friend of mine told me it was very steampunk, and I think it's just punk. You know, Frank Haven Hall, he saw an issue, and he did something really good by making this happen. And there were a lot of people involved in making it. So, you know, he gets credit as the inventor, but there were probably a bunch of people involved. So yeah, here it is, the beautiful Hall Braille Writer. A joy to work with. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to do my best to answer them. And I'll just, like, as though this were a concert, just go out with a little, you know, quiet brailing to myself. So this is the Hall Braille Writer. All right, thanks for watching. Bye. No, so down. Sorry. Oh, I gotta turn the platen knob. That's what that is. Yep. Oh, just whatever comes to mind. This is probably after the point when people have stopped watching. That's what YouTube tells me. But I'm just gonna keep going. You can stop watching at any time. But for those who haven't stopped watching, which is good. It's challenging. Now I'm like trying to braille for people who know Braille, I'm trying to braille the letter N. So that requires me pushing down, you know, four dots, 1, 3, and 4, and 5. But it's not going right now. So I'm trying to push those down with one hand, like I'm making kind of a stretched chord on the piano, and then I'm applying a little pressure to the carriage, because it's being a little stubborn about going through that aforementioned little trapdoor. The other nice thing about this typewriter is that, this Braille writer, is that you can check your work, right? So you have your fingers resting on the keys, and then you can just bring them up to the paper holder and read what you wrote. with the Slaton stylus, it's kind of clamped into this thing, and you are writing upside down and backwards, I believe. So it's easier than it sounds, but it's obviously really nice. That's the difference, and that's another reason why Braille won over, well, why Braille and New York Point were winning, is because they're easier to write and read. A lot of the Braille, or the tactile print that was being made for people, it was copying sort of the Roman letters and numerals. And someone said it was like they were trying to communicate with the language of the eyes to the language of the fingers. So moon type is maybe more useful for people who lost their vision later in life because it resembles the Roman alphabet. But the language of the fingers is really dots. And that's the key for, you know, the 6-dot cell, is it really is the perfect size for one, you know, finger pad to read. So, you know, I said I was going to end this video, but I just kept going. Because who cares? It's a YouTube video. But I am going to end it now. I hope everyone's doing good. Bye. Take care. Thanks for watching Charlie's Desk.